Hello, my darlings. Today we're going to go over the research opening, your first paragraph. And your first paragraph has to do three things. The first thing it needs to do is it needs to catch the reader's attention. So hook them in, make them excited about your topic. The second thing it needs to do is establish the importance. And this can just be a sentence. This is millions of people have read Anne Frank's diary, or this is thousands of people have died from tuberculosis, or most people have heard of Edgar Allan Poe, anything along those lines. And then it also has to have as the very last sentence its thesis. Now, having it as the last sentence is not a hard and fast rule, but it is something that makes it do double duty. It works as a transition, so it saves you work to do it like that. We're going to talk about a lot of these later. But you're going to notice that a lot of my examples tend to be, a bit violent or a bit gory. There's a reason for this. In the newspaper world, it's called "if it bleeds, it leads," meaning anything that has to do with blood and violence, or, in all honesty, sex, it's something that intrigues people and gets them hooked in your paper. So that is a route you can take if your paper lends itself to that. If you're doing something very pure and simple, then, you don't need to do it like that. You can start with a startling statistic. Vlad the Impaler killed 20,000 Turks in one Sunday afternoon. You can, if you're doing a person, you can also start with the death. So start with Anne Frank's death. Start with Abe Lincoln or Ben Franklin's death. We expect to start with their birth. So to hear first about the way they died and to be able to connect that to their life can make some interesting hooks. Okay, so let's look at some examples. The first thing you can do is describe a scene. So Anne nursed her sister who was dying. Typhus was everywhere. She had already lost her mother, Peter, the Van Dans, and who knew where her father was? All that was left was Margot. After that, who would ever remember her? Anne Frank lived in an attic during the Holocaust. Her diary would be found years later after her death by her father, who would later publish it. It became famous worldwide. Anne Frank's legacy came from her diary, which cataloged the events of hiding during the Holocaust. All right, so this is a story. We don't have it for sure, but we do know her sister died of typhus. Anne Frank was nursing her. So it is based on facts that I'm later going to talk about. And so I can describe it in a very human, personalized way. The next thing you can do is an anecdote. And I'm sure you've heard me tell this story. But basically what I mean by an anecdote is, those extra facts that were interesting, but they just didn't fit into your paper anywhere. This is a great place to put them. Make them the opening, bring people into your paper right away. You can also start with a definition. Guillotine, an instrument for cutting off a person's head by means of a heavy blade dropped between two grooved uprights. When you do something like this, it is very important that you cite the where you got this information. You cite the dictionary, or you cite the the quotes, Bartlett's, or, some people like to go to quote websites and find a quote. And that's a nice, easy way to write a hook. The problem is eventually you do have to go back to your work, cite it, and do all of that part again, where you find the author, you have pages printed, the sponsoring website, the sponsoring organization, date you accessed, all that stuff. And so if that's easy for you, go find your definition, go find your quote online. Make sure if that's like, oh man, that's a lot of work, I don't want to do that, then choose one of the other ones. Don't go this route. So it seems easy, but it can be complicated. To continue, this again explains the importance of the topic, and then this is the thesis. If you're doing a disease or an historic event, you can sort of make up a story to illustrate what it would be like if you eventually have a sentence that says this isn't true, but it could be, and your facts back this up later on in your paper. Now, this isn't something you should do if you're doing a person for your research paper. So one year someone made up a story about Oprah. And you can't make up stories about people, certainly not living people, and certainly not living people who sue for that sort of thing. So if you're doing your paper on Abe Lincoln or Oprah, please don't go this route. Oh, it got dark here. Angela coughed into her handkerchief. Drops of blood again. Tuberculosis, she thought. She looked at her two small daughters and decided to hide it so she would not be taken to the hospital to die away from her daughters. This story isn't true, but it could be. Tuberculosis was often a fatal disease discovered by coughing up drops of blood. Though it killed many, eventually an effective cure was discovered. Tuberculosis was a fatal disease that baffled scientists for centuries until a cure was discovered. All right, the darkness is gone. So once again, be careful using this, but it works really well for showing what it would be like to have a disease or what it would be like for someone in Gettysburg. So there's that. A movie scene is similar to a definition, or starting with a poem. Again, you do have to have the director and the timestamp, and then at the end you have to go to MLA and you have to cite it. So you have to show the director, the publishing company, the timestamps, all that stuff. So again, it can be a pain, but it can also be well worth it. Scene, Russia during World War II, a battle of Stalingrad. New soldiers are thrown off the train and handed their weapons. Unfortunately, there's only enough for every other soldier. Vasily, the best sniper in all of Russia, is handed nothing but ammo. Vasily, I've got to get a gun. Thousands died during the Battle of Stalingrad. It was one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. Many people died needlessly in the Battle of Stalingrad because Russia lacked basic necessities for its soldiers. Okay, another thing you can do is humanize it. So in this one, I take the sword of a knight. They're doing the weapons of the Crusades, and turning his sword, what would it be like if his sword was a lady? What do they have in common? He called the sword his lady because she was trustworthy, sharp, always by his side, and never complained. This imaginary knight might have loved his sword more than the trebuchet, and I'm sorry if I screw that up. I never know how to pronounce that word. More than the crossbow, and more than the mace. So again, because I say this imaginary knight, I'm allowed to sort of make stuff up, fluff a little stuff. But I do show the commonalities. He loves her. She's always by his side. She's trustworthy. She's sharp. He never leaves her. So that's one way of doing that. You can start with a question. Be cautious with this one because there's a lot of bad questions out there. Bad questions are, do you want to learn more about Abe Lincoln? To which most people are honestly going to respond, no. So yes or no questions are bad. And then questions are usually bad. Have you ever heard of the Holocaust? Is going to invite a snarky no, and I don't want to, or even yes, and I don't want to. A much better question would be, why would Abe Lincoln, who was assertively aiding the South after the Civil War, be shot by a Southerner? So anytime you can highlight irony with your question, or you can ask something that gets people thinking, that's the sort of question you're after. And then finally, you can have a joke, which I think is hilarious, but you guys might not. A British person was returning from a trip from America. He was telling his friend that most Americans don't own a tea kettle. How do they make tea? He was complaining. The friend laughed. They throw it in the harbor. Here I tell where I got my joke, because it is not my original joke. And then in my works cited, I also cite it again. The event is the friend is referring to as the Boston Tea Party. During this party, thousands of pounds of tea were thrown overboard as a demonstration against British taxes. The Boston Tea Party was one of the major events that led to the American Revolution. Another thing you can do is do what's called bookends. So start a story in the opening and then leave it with a mystery and then refer back to it in your closing. Which can, that little mystery and then the closing can make it sound good. Be aware that your opening should be only about half a page and your closing should only be about half a page. So don't go longer than that, but definitely fill up that half page if you wish. Thank you, and good writing.